Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome. Great to have you all here for this new edition of Torah L'Chaim, where we study the weekly Parsha, sometimes a little bit more than that. Like today, we're going to study a little bit about Tisha BeAv as well, but it's great to have you there. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here. Thank you so much for keep coming to my classes, so we can fulfill this important mitzvah of studying Torah together. Hello, Priscilla. Yes, congrats, Argentinian soccer. Oh, thank you, Priscilla. For those of you who don't know, Priscilla is from Brazil. So she's probably not the happiest person in the world right now, because we just have Copa America, which is the final between all the soccer teams of South America. And in the final, Argentina beat Brazil. In Brazil! Doesn't happen so often. So, yeah, what can I say? You win some, you lose some. This time went to Argentina, probably next time you're going to go to Brazil. That's the way sports are. And also we have Gloria Perdomo. Welcome. Shelly Chochinov. Great to have you here. And pretty lame. Well, yeah, sometimes you lose, but it was okay, the game, I guess. I saw a little bit. Yeah, lots of tension there. I don't watch too much sports. Makes me too anxious and my blood pressure goes up. Not worth it. I rather study Torah. So again, welcome everyone. If you are with us today, please let me know. Use the chat. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. And if you haven't done so, please remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell, so you're going to be notified every time we go live or every time we upload something to our channels. So we are going to be studying today Parshat Devarim. That means that we already started actually this week, the last book of the Torah, which is crazy. We are already there. At the end of the book of Devarim, we are going to be celebrating Simchat Torah, which means that the high holidays are around the corner. Now, we have Tisha BeAv this weekend, and then it's all preparation for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, and Simchat Torah. It's going to be the new thing starting next week. So hopefully we are going to spend a little bit of time studying this beautiful Parsha, which is different. The book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, is different from the other four books of the Torah in the sense that it's not the word of God. I mean, I'm not saying that it does not represent the will of God, but it's not the voice of God. The whole book of Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell speech. Moses knows that he's about to die. God told him that. So before that happens, Moses had the opportunity to address the entire nation of Israel, wishing them well, warning them about the challenges that they are going to have once they cross the Jordan River and enter to the Promised Land. And Moses is going to give them advice so they won't make too many mistakes after they enter to the Promised Land. Now, Moses, remember, was, I guess, punished by God, so he will not enter to the Promised Land. He will have a chance to go up the mountain and to see the land of Israel, but he won't be able to cross the Jordan River. Now, there is something very interesting that I read once. It says that God also gave Moses a bonus. So he will have a little bit of consolation into experiencing the settling into the land process. How so? Because remember, it's going to be, in this week Parsha, we're going to read about these tribes. There were 2.5 tribes that they didn't want to cross the Jordan River. They wanted to stay there in present-day Jordan because they like the land, they have lots of cattle, and they said, we don't want to cross the Jordan, we are fine settling here. So yes, no. Finally Moses says, okay, you can do it. So they started to build the cities there in front of Moses. So Moses kind of had a little bit of an experience of his people settling in a land for good. That was the moment where they stopped being a nomadic tribes, but an established nation. So Moses had that bonus from God before it was his time to leave this world. Something that not too many people realize that happened with Moses. But I think it was a beautiful token from God, a beautiful small prize for everything that Moses did for the Jewish people to experience at least part of the people of Israel settling somewhere. So, yeah. So Moses starts his speech, and is going to repeat the entire Torah in his words to this new generation that some of them did not experience the revelation. They were not there. So Moses will have to recap everything that the older generation knew, but they died. Remember, that was the idea. 40 years walking in circles, the desert, until the whole generation will die and a new generation will inherit the promised land. It was all good, except that this new generation did not experience Sinai. They didn't have that experience of the presence of God and the revelation of Torah. So Moses is about to teach this new generation the entire Torah in his own words. Then, of course, you can have a more in-depth study of the book of Deuteronomy, trying to catch the differences in style, in language, in the intention of every single sentence that Moses is going to present. Even when Moses repeats the 10 Commandments in the book of Deuteronomy are not 100% the same of what was experienced in the book of Exodus. And stuff like that is going to be all over the book of Deuteronomy, where things are not exactly the same. They have the same idea, but the words are going to be different. And I guess it makes sense, because one of the keys for the success of a teacher is to know your students. In the case of Moses, I guess he realized the needs of this new generation, so he adapted all the information that he had into a language that they could understand and into a language that will be meaningful to them. It's a very interesting concept. Okay, so let's get into the Parsha, and we are going to study. Let's see. Right here. Oops. Sorry. There you go. There you go. First text I want to talk to you is Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 5, and it says, בעבר הירדן בארץ מואב, הואיל משה באר את התורה הזאת לאמור. Okay, it says, beyond the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses began to explain this Torah, saying. Okay, so you can tell it's an introduction, that everything else that is going to come after that is going to be Moses explaining the Torah. But this is the interesting thing, the way Rashi explains the verse. Rashi says that Moses translated the entire Torah for the people of Israel into 70 languages. Kind of crazy. Hi, Andrea. Andrea, welcome to the class. So why do you think Moses actually translated the Torah into 70 languages? What do you think it means? Feel free to use the chat to let me know your thoughts. There is no right and wrong here. Don't be shy. I just want to know your opinion. Why do you think Rashi said what he said? And immediately after, we're going to read a few interpretations of different rabbis, of their understanding of Rashi's words. What do you think? I'll give you a minute to think about that. why the need to translate the Torah into 70 languages. Because one of the things that you are going to, that at least I realize is, did they really have 70 languages back in the day? The people of Israel probably had one language. I don't know which language they spoke at the time. Hebrew, Egyptian maybe? I don't know. Probably it was about 1, 2, maybe 3 languages among the people that were there in front of Moses. Why the 70 languages? Well, when you think about it, I'm going to go to the next text. And first, I want to talk to you about the number 70 in this context, okay? Because the number, Andrea said, how could, let's see. I have here, Andrea, you said, how could he even speak 70 languages? That's difficult. Of course it is. You see, that's the other thing. How in this world Moses knew 70 languages? Yeah. And then Jerome. Welcome, Jerome. You said to spread the ideas across the world. Okay. So basically what you said is he did it in advance. It's a good thing. But Michael Legov said Google Translate. Yeah. If you think that everything is already included in the Torah, probably Google Translate was in the Torah as well. Kind of sounds like Yiddish, right? Google, Kindle, sounds like Yiddish words. Yeah. Jerome, you said the 70 language Tower of Babel. Yeah, it kind of brings it back all the way to the Tower of Babel when it says that at that time everybody spoke one single language, and then eventually people were spread all around the world into different nations, and the rabbis explained that they have 70 languages back then. It's a symbolic number, but it represents all the languages of different nations. Okay? So, and Shelley, you say, Hashem gave Moshe a preview of Israel of the future. Then 70 nations? Maybe. Good point. But it seems to be this concept of Moses doing something that it was not just for them, but it is implied that is something there that is intended to be for the future. It's not a minor thing. The fact that Moses said, I'm going to say this in 70 different languages, so it's not just for you. It is implied that the desire of having this Torah being available to everyone who would like to read it, study it, embrace it. So it's almost like Moses is making it easier for everyone around the world to access this Torah. That's a very interesting concept. Hello, Denise. Don't worry, you're not late. Nobody's late here. And Priscilla, you said maybe to give every nation an opportunity to do Teshuvah instead of repentance, to change based on the Torah. Good thing. Yeah. And then Gloria, you said perhaps Hashem talked at Mount Sinai in those languages. Yeah, again, there is a little bit of that, of God, when God revealed the Torah and it was understood by everybody, in the sense that there is a midrash about that. It doesn't matter the languages you spoke back in the day, you would understand the revelation. Because I don't really think that when we talk about the voice of God talking, I can't really imagine that it's like an actual voice, but it's something that you understand right away because it's coming from God. And then I guess because we don't have the right words to describe that kind of experience, we talk about the voice of God and so forth. Yeah. And Priscilla, you said here, because the Jews were spread around the world. Yeah, that's another thing. Very good point. God knowing, or Moses knowing in advance, that eventually the Jews are going to be exiled from their land so they can take the Torah wherever they go. That's a very good point as well. But let's talk a little bit now about this, the number 70. Okay, because this is not the first time that the number 70 is presented. So where did Rashi take this 70 from, right? It's not there in the Torah, but nevertheless Rashi mentions this 70. So I would like to give a little bit this presented by Rabbi Bechaya ben Asher ibn Halawa, and he said the first time the number 70 appears in the Torah is in the list of genealogy following the flood. Okay, Genesis chapter 10 enumerates exactly 70 descendants of Noah. Okay, so we learn from this verse that the world comprises of 70 nations, each with its own language. Okay, so when we are talking in Judaism about the 70 nations of the world, the 70 languages and blah, 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 it's all coming from this concept, the descendants of Noah. The rabbis count 70 in the Torah. Okay. Let's see what Denise have to say. Denise, you said maybe Hashem gave an outline of what the Torah will be and how it will be implemented over time for the Israelites. Different translation for the priests, leaders, than the lay people. Interesting. So basically what you said is that 70 represented different ways of understanding the Torah depends on where you are. Good point as well. Good point. So let's continue with another interpretation of this concept of the 70. Now we have this text from Rabbi Yehuda Amital. It's beautiful. Listen to this. It says, Am Israel, which means the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, certainly did not know 70 languages. That's what I mentioned at the beginning. And even if they had, what would be the purpose of translating into 70 languages, since they surely understood Hebrew best of all? Right? Okay, that would be the first rational approach to the concept of translating the Torah. No need at the time. Rashi's explanation expresses an important idea. The 70 languages represent the 70 cultures of the world. Okay, we have a new concept. Not just 70 nations, but every nation with their own culture. Moses, wished to teach people of Israel that the Torah has something to say in every culture. Throughout history, many different cultures have arisen, each in conflict with Judaism from a different point of view. And therefore, Judaism has had to address each in an individual way. Moses' message was that the Torah has an answer for every nation and for every culture. Commenting on the verse, understand the years of each generation, the author of Hidushei Arim used to say that every generation must apply the Torah to his era, seeking the elements necessary in order to address the various challenges posed by that generation. This is the function of the tzaddik, the righteous person, but it also refers to it's another way to refer to the rabbis, or some special rabbis. This is the function of the tzaddik in each generation. The Torah contains all that is needed to face all these challenges. One has only to know how to seek the answers. Bye, Priscilla. Thank you for being here. Go take care of your patients. See you next time. So, as you can see here, what this rabbi is implying, that this concept of Moses translating the Torah means that Moses, in his, I guess, divinely inspired wisdom, was able to present to the people of Israel the concept and maybe even some advice into how the Torah could be applied in every generation and in every circumstance. And this is something that we all experience, and sometimes we all struggled with, to be able to find meaningful messages in the Torah that they can actually help us to live our lives here and now, right here, right now. So that's why we have different interpretations in different generations. And that's what I believe. We have, of course, two Torahs, what we call the written Torah and the oral Torah. The written Torah is what we all know from Genesis to Deuteronomy, what we call the scroll of Torah or the book of Torah. But we also have the oral Torah that we believe is a thing. And when I say we, I'm talking about what I like to call rabbinic Jews. Because there were other Jews along Jewish history that they were not rabbinic. They did not accept the authority of the rabbis, and they did not believe in such thing of the oral law. In these days, you will have a group called the Karaites. If you want, you can Google them, that they don't accept the oral law. They believe everything is contained within the written Torah. Okay? But let's go back to rabbinic Judaism. The belief is that God revealed to Moses not just the written Torah, but also the oral Torah, which contain all the information on how to understand the Torah. That oral information is supposed to remain oral. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. The whole idea was to have the written Torah and the oral Torah. But eventually, out of need, the oral Torah was written down. And is what we call today the Talmud, which is a combination of Mishnah and Gemara. That's what we call the Talmud, and it's written. It's a book. You can buy it. You can have it in your library, your bookshelves. But it does not mean that was the original intention from God. The original intention was to have a written Torah and an oral Torah. When something is oral, it's alive, it's dynamic, and I believe it adapts better to different needs and different generations. When something is written down, it becomes solid. And then it's more difficult to adapt. And we are all struggling with that. When in every generation we have sometimes issues that arise in the generations, and it's difficult for us to find precedents in the Talmud or precedents in the Torah. And even if we had a precedent, it doesn't really fit because it's something different. And we all struggle, and then it's very difficult to find solutions. And I will give you just a few examples. When we have challenges with, let's start with something that it's been going for a while and we have some solutions, but we're still working on it. Same-sex marriages, right? It was a long way because it's difficult to find those precedents in the Talmud. And let me try to find another one for you. Cloning, stem cells, transplant of organs, and so forth. New things, and then we have... Once you have something written down, then it's more difficult to, quote-unquote, change. Because I don't think, even if it's oral, that we are changing anything. It just is an organic body of law. So it will be easier to... it will be a better resource to provide answers. That's my opinion. And that I understand if somebody thinks something else, but in the sense that Moses already told this to the Jewish people back then, that the Torah that they learned at that time, the way it was taught by Moses, it may not be the exact thing that it will be useful 1,000 years from there, or maybe even at 50 years from that day. And they will have to be able to find what they need within the Torah, no matter where they are and when they are. Where geographically and when in time, right? So we should be able also to find all that inspiration in the Torah. Hello, Judy. Welcome to the class. So, let's continue with this. Here. The concept of the 70 languages and 70 translations, we call it Shivim Panim LaTorah, 70 faces of the Torah. And I want to present another text about that. This Rabbi Moshe Ben Chaim says, it will seem that when we say Shivim Panim LaTorah, there are 70 faces to the Torah, we mean that there can be many explanations for a given topic. However, the explanation must make sense. There was a point in history when there were no machloktim, disputes over halakha, Jewish law. It was only after minds became less sharp than the original Balei HaMesorah, the transmitters of the law. Here he's talking about the original rabbis, right? That they were scholars and they knew absolutely everything. And because they knew absolutely everything, they never argue with each other. They all have the same information. But I said, it looks like eventually they became not so... How can I say this nicely? Because if you go and read in the original the Talmud, they would call them lazy, right? They were too lazy to study in the same way that the first generation of rabbis used to study the Torah. So because they weren't as applied to the studies that the previous generation, then there was some information that they missed from their teachers. So when the time came to use that information, they didn't really have the whole picture. So they started to disagree. And that's what this text says, that the time when we began to see disputes. Okay? So eventually, to keep one identity to the Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, was written. So the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, is a book that has an index. It's very clear. You want to know what to do, you go to the index. Okay, as it said, early in the morning, getting out of bed. What do? You go to the right page, it will tell you what to do. It won't tell you why. It will just tell you what to do. That's it. Okay, if all you want to know what to do, boom, go there. But really, both Hillel and Shammai, two famous rabbis that used to, not them, but their students used to disagree with each other, cannot both be right on the same point. Do you agree with that? That sometimes when you have two different opinions, logic says that one is right, one is wrong. Yeah, if we are disagreeing, if we can cross the street when the light is red, and you said yes you can, and I say no you cannot, then one of us has to be right, and the other one will be wrong. Okay, so that's what he said. Hillel and Shammai cannot both be right on the same point, but this is where rabbinic thought is different. The fact that they cannot be right at the same time doesn't really matter, as the goal is not to determine what Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, knew, but to determine with one's own mind how one sees an area. Halakha, Jewish law, is not based on what Moshe Rabbeinu will have said, but it's based on what a rabbi determines today. There is a Gemara, a text from the Talmud, where a certain individual stated that had Yehoshua bin Nun, that's Joshua, right? The next leader after Moses. Had Joshua told me such and such, I would not listen to him. Big statement. What does this show? It shows that we are not looking for confirmation from the original Balei HaMesorah, from the original rabbis. This is not what makes halakha, Jewish law. Rather, as the Torah states, al pi haTorah asher yorucha, in accordance with the Torah which they, the rabbis, teach you. The rabbis today create halakha for us. When we are perplexed, we consult our rabbis, and they determine the halakha. Yeah, but you see, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. I totally agree with this. And at the same time, I realize that because the oral law was eventually written down, this is more difficult to apply, this principle. It's beautiful in principle, but in practice, because many things have been written down, more difficult to make it a reality. Denise, what do you say? Let me see. I agree. I think religion, especially Judaism, evolves, and we use the oral tradition to make written Torah fit for contemporary mores, customs, sociology, etc. Yep. And Claudette, welcome. They said they can have different interpretations. Yes. That's why the halakha, the Jewish law, is that you have your rabbi, your rabbi with capital R, and then you always ask the same rabbi. You are not, this is something that I discuss with my students all the time. You don't go rabbi shopping every time you need a halachic solution. You need to go to your rabbi, and whatever that rabbi tells you, that is literally the voice of God. It's the one that is interpreting the Torah for you. And that becomes the will of God. Now, within the Torah, even within the Torah, we know that there are 4 different ways to read every verse or every halachic principle. 4 different ways. And I put it here for you so you can we can review this. It said the 4 levels of understanding the Torah are Pshat, the straightforward explanation of literal meaning of the text. Usually Rashi will bring this kind of interpretations. The Rash, the deeper explanation of the text based on established exegetical principles known from tradition. Okay, this is the use of Midrash to analyze the Torah. Next one is Remez. The word Remez literally means a hint or allusion. In essence, Remez is a lower level of the profound understanding of the Torah represented by Sod. So basically, Remez is an allegory. For example, if the Torah is talking about the altar in the temple and the fire, well, I could say, well, really it's not the altar, it's the people of Israel, and the fire is not the fire, it's the Torah. You know what I mean? To read the entire text as an allegory, not as something literal. That is the remez. It's a technique to read the Torah. But you see, depends of which technique you use, you may even get different understandings of the text, which will bring another level of complexity to the biblical text. And eventually the most difficult one, and usually is listed at the very end because it's understood that you're already familiar with the other 3, is the Sod, the Kabbalistic, secret or mystical explanation of the text. Yes, we all know people that they go straight to the 4th one. They are expert in Kabbalah, but they don't really know the other 3 levels. Traditionally, that was a no-no. Sod should be the last stage into your biblical studies. You should have a solid foundation on the first 3 before you undertake studies of Kabbalah. And I understand that doesn't happen. Okay? So, any questions so far? I haven't seen much movement in the chat for a while. Nope. Okay. So let's continue with the next text. Now we are going to start switching gears into Tisha BeAv, which is the anniversary of the destruction of the first and the second temple, and we are going to be observing Tisha BeAv Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat. Once Shabbat ends, we start with Tisha BeAv. It's a fast day. Okay, so we finish Shabbat, we have a meal when we finish Shabbat, and then we don't eat until the following evening. I wanted to bring a text that we usually study during Tisha BeAv, and this is about the rabbis trying to understand the destruction of the temple. We studied in previous classes all this biblical connection with the destruction of the temple. For example, that the day of Tisha BeAv was the day where the spies came back. Remember, the 12 spies came back after spying the land of Israel. They came with a negative report, and that created that everybody was crying because of the bad report. And God said to the entire people of Israel, because you cried without a reason, I want to give you a reason to cry. That was the day that it was pre-established. That it was going to be the day of the destruction of the temple and so forth. But now the rabbis in the Talmud are going to present a story that is going to have also different levels of meaning. It's going to be a story on what triggered the destruction of the temple at that specific generation. We are talking about the destruction of the second temple. The Romans were in charge, And this is what the Talmud says, and this is from Masechet Gitin. It says, because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. And when I say Jerusalem, is also talking about not just the city, but the temple. It happened this way. A certain man had a friend named Kamsa and an enemy called Bar Kamsa. He once made a party and said to his servants, go and bring Kamsa. The man went and brought Bar Kamsa. Just a little mistake. When the man who gave the party found Bar Kamsa there, he said, see, you're my enemy. What are you doing here? Get out, said the others. Look, since I'm already here, let me stay, and I will pay for you whatever I eat and drink. Said the host, absolutely not. Well, then let me give you half of the cost of the party. The host refused. Then let me pay for the whole party, but please don't embarrass me. Still, the host refused and took him by the hand and threw him out. Said Bar Kamsa, since the rabbis were sitting there and did not stop him, this shows that they agreed with him. I will go and inform against them to the government. Whoa. You see, this is heavy stuff, because it looks like it was a big party. Rabbis were invited. They witnessed all this back and forth between the host and Bar Kamsa, and they didn't say anything. So now Bar Kamsa was really hurt. He was embarrassed in front of everybody, and he started to plot revenge. So what happened? He said, since the rabbi were there and didn't do anything, I will go and inform against them to the government. So he's going to slander everybody just to get payback from the Roman government. He went and said to the emperor, the Jews are rebelling against you. How so? Said the emperor, how can I know that this is true? I mean, the emperor, I don't know if he was evil or not, but he just wouldn't just believe this Bar Kamsa, whatever his name was, right? Send them an offering, said Bar Kamsa, and see whether they offer it on the altar or not. So back in the day, the temple was a Jewish temple, but they would accept offerings sometimes from non-Jews if the animals were kosher. Okay, if they would present an animal that it was okay according to Jewish law, that's okay. The emperor could do that. So the emperor sent with him, with Bar Kamsa, a fine calf. It's a perfect calf. Well, on the way, he made a blemish on the upper lip of the calf, or as some say, on the white of his eye, in a place where we counted a blemish, but they do not. In other words, because the Romans, they also have sacrifices in their own pagan temples, and they all have these rules that the animals that they have to be presented on their temples, they have to be perfect, without any blemish. But it looks like, according to Jewish law, the blemished that the priest will look in the animals were a little bit different than the blemished that the pagan's priest will look in an animal. So Bar Kamsa was familiar with both Jewish rituals and Roman rituals. So he made, on purpose, a blemish on this calf in a place that it will be okay for Romans, but it will be non-kosher for Jews. So the rabbis saw the animal. They knew that it was coming from the emperor. So the rabbis were inclined to offer the animal, in order not to offend the government. Said Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas to them, people will say that blemished animals are offered on the altar. Oh, the optics, right? They then proposed to kill Bar Kamsa so that he should not go and inform against them. But Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas said to them, is one who makes a blemish on consecrated animals to be put to death? That's not Jewish law. So Rabbi Yochanan thereupon remarked, because of the Anavatenuto, scrupulousness of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas. Our house has been destroyed, our temple burned, and we ourselves exiled from our land. Now, this is the interesting thing, because remember how the story began? Very first line, because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. At the very end says, because of the scrupulousness of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas, our house has been destroyed, our temple burned, and we ourselves exiled from our land. Whoa. So, how is it? Is it because of Kamsa ben Kamsa? Or because of the rabbis? And even so, why because of Kamsa? What was his fault? He didn't even know that it was a party going on. He never got the invitation. Why is the Talmud blaming Kamsa? I understand about Kamsa, but why Kamsa? But at the end, everything changed. He says, forget about Bar Kamsa. What he did was terrible. But it's almost blaming the rabbis for the destruction of the temple. What was so bad? What was so bad that the temple was destroyed? Yeah, Denise, you said maybe a combination of both. Yeah, but at the end, it's not a coincidence that the Talmud ends blaming the rabbis for what it happened. Okay? But yes, I want to bring to you another story that is going to talk about that. Where is it? Here. So, Denise, just what you were talking. Who is at fault? Then said, everyone involves. Kamsa, who never appears in the story, is the sole exception. Poor Kamsa. His name was in the middle of this and he didn't even know what happened. So the certain man who arranged the party, we don't know his name, he's guilty. Bar Kamsa, because he went to slander the people of Israel. The attending rabbis, who said nothing. All of them contributed to the debacle. And any of them could have stopped it. You realize that? It was a long string of things, but even if one of them will do something different, we'll still have the temple in Jerusalem. So who is at fault? The better question may be, what is at fault? And the answer will be toxic anger and indifference. Toxic anger and indifference. The anger of Bar Kamsa, and also the anger of the host, who kept that grudge against Bar Kamsa for who knows how long, and also the indifference of the rabbis. But it was one more thing, and is the fact that the rabbis did not take a lenient approach in order to save the temple. They could have sacrificed the animal. I said, look, this is a special circumstances. Now, I understand when the Torah was revealed, the sacrifices and everything, I get that. But now we have the Roman Empire that is about to destroy the city of Jerusalem. Can we have a different interpretation of the sacrifices in order to save our people? Or we should be so stringent that we can't change anything to make a difference in the generation? Those rabbis failed into taking a lenient approach. And sometimes we know that we need to take a lenient approach in many issues of halakha. And it is for the sake of the generation. Because if we insist on being stringent of everything we do, then pretty soon we won't have anybody. Synagogues understood it many years ago, some synagogues, right? To make things a little bit more lenient, to have a more lenient approach. Otherwise, people will be scared and they will reject Judaism altogether. So we try to be as lenient as we can for the sake of the generation. Claudette, you said that what Moshe will have done. Well, hopefully And that's why I wanted to refer back to Rashi's interpretation that said that Moses said it in 70 different languages, in the sense that every generation will have to analyze it to see if it's fit to their reality. So I would like to believe that Moses will have, in that particular case, a more lenient approach, right? So I wanted to bring you this text that it said, it is important for us to realize that the power of leniency, as the Talmud says, is very strong. In fact, in almost every argument between Beit Shammai and Ben Hillel, that he's more lenient, and the law is like him. So between Hillel and Shammai, usually Hillel was the more lenient of the two. And the law, 99% of the time, follow Hillel, follow the lenient approach. Would it be better or more religious to be strict about Jewish law? In fact, we see that many times, right? We feel that the religious Jew should be strict. Forget about leniency. The more stringent you are, the better of a Jew you are. Wrong. Wrong, if you ask me. No. Yet we follow the more lenient opinion of Beit Hillel. And in the several situations in which Shammai is more lenient, we follow Shammai. Perhaps the power of leniency is greater than the power of strictness. To think that we should always be strict, that is better and more religious, is a mistake that many in our community make. I imagine out of ignorance, yes, of course, it's easier to say no, right? It's always easier to say no. Sometimes you really need to know in order to say, I think you can do it. They also do not realize that the other side of the coin of every strictness is another leniency. A leniency which might be inappropriate, a leniency that might distance us from God and Torah. According to the Talmud, Hillel knew more than Shammai, because Hillel knew his opinion and that of his opponent. The same is often true today. Those that are able to be lenient may in fact know more about halakha than those who are always strict. As the Talmud says, koach tehetira adif, the power of leniency is greater. And this is something that we not always talk about for Tisha BeAv. We always talk, yes, about the temple, the destruction of the temple, but have we ever talked about the fact that maybe the temple was destroyed because we didn't know how to be lenient in a time that we supposed to be lenient? Think about that. Maybe that should be a theme or something to have into consideration this year as we fast during Tisha BeAv. I don't know, just food for thought for everyone to analyze that, if perhaps we are not paying the consequences right now of generations who didn't know how to be lenient. Maybe that's something that we should learn. Because it's not just about Jewish law. It's about the way you treat others as well. Or you are a person who pretend that your rabbi should be lenient towards you, but you are never lenient towards other people when leniency is necessary. And you're always strict, and you're always offended, and you're always angry at the other human beings because you have zero tolerance. Perhaps Tisha BeAv is bringing a message of how important it is leniency in our lives, not just with our Judaism, but also in relationships with other human beings. As I said, food for thoughts. So, before we wrap up, I wanted to bring a couple of concepts for Tisha BeAv. And again, Tisha BeAv, what is it? It's the 9th day, the Jewish month of Av, which starts at sundown on the 8th day, which is Saturday evening, and concludes at sundown on the 9th day of Av, Sunday evening. This is the day when the intensity of the entire 3-week mourning period reaches its peak. Remember, we started the process on the 17th of Tammuz. 3 weeks later is Tisha BeAv. So, a little historical wrap-up here, a summary. According to our sages, many tragic events occurred to our ancestors on this day, on the day of Tisha BeAv. Number 1, we studied that previous class, the sin of the spies caused Hashem to decree that the children of Israel who left Egypt will not be permitted to enter the land of Israel. Another one, the first temple was destroyed. The second temple was destroyed. Both temples, same date. Beitar, the last fortress to hold out against the Romans during the Bar Kokhba revolt in the year 135, fell, sealing the fate of the Jewish people. 1 year after the fall of Beitar, the temple area was plowed. In 1492, King Ferdinand of Spain issued the expulsion decree, setting Tisha BeAv as the final date by which not a single Jew will be allowed to walk on Spanish soil. It is also believed that the World War I, which began the downward slide to the Holocaust, began on Tisha BeAv. So many things, and the bombing of the AMIA in Argentina happened 1 day after Tisha BeAv, by the way, it was 10th of Av. And many things happen during Tisha BeAv or around Tisha BeAv. It's a very tragic date for the Jewish people. And we have a few prohibitions on Tisha BeAv. And so the prohibition of Tisha BeAv are similar of those of Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, right? In addition of not eating or drinking, we are not allowed to wash, anoint oneself, or wear leather shoes. In a prohibition, in a sense, I would say, it's a little bit more stringent than Yom Kippur, because we are only allowed to study certain portions of the Torah and Talmud on Tisha BeAv, because it's the understanding that Torah, Talmud, the prophets, and so forth brings joy. So there are only certain things that we read. We read the rebukes in the Torah. We read the text in the Talmud talking about the destruction of the temple and so forth. Now, the other difference that will be between Tisha BeAv and Yom Kippur is on Tisha BeAv you can work, but in Yom Kippur you cannot. That's another difference that we have there. And as I mentioned before, it's a 24-hour fast, just like Yom Kippur. But I wanted to bring to you one response from the conservative movement that they suggest that perhaps the fast should be a little shorter and not to observe it for 24 hours. Why is that? It was a question brought to the Rabbi, how you call it, the Rabbinical Assembly in New York, the conservative movement, and the question was, is one obligated to fast for a full day on Tisha BeAv after the state of Israel was founded and the reunification of Jerusalem? Because remember, this was part of the issues. This was part of the equation of why we fast. We read that from the Talmud, right? We fast because Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and the exile began. 3 things. So the question is, whoa, hold on a minute. Now that we have Israel again, 2 out of 3 are gone. It's not a problem anymore. Exile is optional. If you want to go to Israel, you can go to Israel. Jerusalem is there once again. But yes, we don't have the temple. The temple is still destroyed. So the question is, the fact that 2 out of the 3 reasons for the fasting are gone, do we still have to fast for 24 hours? Good question, right? Shelly, what do you say, Shelly? You said, for me, total fast is not a problem, but not coffee. No coffee. You know what? You can stay in bed. Usually we have coffee to wake up, right? Stay in bed. So, I bring just the end of the response. It's a much longer text, but it says, there is a clear historical precedent of canceling a fast on days in which the Jewish people was saved from a disaster. We have been so fortunate as to witness the founding of the State of Israel, where Jews are sitting on their land as a sovereign people. In light of this decisive change in the history of the Jewish people, I proposed marking this change by not completing the fast on Tisha BeAv and concluding the fast with a Mincha Gedola service, and that is around 2:14 p.m. in Winnipeg. So basically what you do is you fast, and at 2:14 p.m. you daven Mincha, and then you can eat if you follow this Teshuvah, which by the way was not unanimously approved, but is there. It was proposed conservative movement, and I was taught this response by my former rabbi in Chile, who that's the tradition that he follows, and that's the tradition that I follow because it came from my mentor. So if you don't have a tradition, you want to follow this one. Remember, 2:14 p.m. you daven, you pray, you have to pray mincha, and then you can eat, or you can go all the way to the end of the fast on Sunday evening. So Denise, what you say is the fasting is hard because I need some food for medication. Is that allowed? Absolutely, yes. Even in Yom Kippur, if it's for health reasons, you can eat. In fact, there is a famous text about that, and let me bring it for you. It says, on Yom Kippur, listen to this story. It's for you, Denise. There was a cholera epidemic in the city of Brisk. After Kol Nidre, Rabbi Chaim of Brisk made Kiddush and ate and made everyone else in Shul eat. Yom Kippur. Afterwards, people asked him, wasn't he being more lenient about the laws of Yom Kippur than Shulchan Aruch? The Shulchan Aruch writes that one may only eat on Yom Kippur if their life is endangered, but no one yet has contracted cholera. Rabbi Chaim answered, I am not being lenient about the laws of Yom Kippur, but on the contrary, I am being strict about the laws of Pikuach Nefesh, guarding one's life. So yes, if you have to take a medicine, you can absolutely eat, because in that case you have to be stringent in the mitzvah of taking care of yourself. So, thank you again, everyone, for being here. And it's always a pleasure to have a time to study Torah together. In this case, I hope I brought some uplifting messages for the preparation for Tisha BeAv. This Saturday is something that is so detached from us, right? To do something about the temple in Jerusalem that we, sacrifices. It feels so foreign. So it is our obligation to find meaning into all these observances, meaning for us in this generation. So the challenge for each one of us is, what kind of powerful message for us can we find on Tisha BeAv? I hope I brought some of the answers. Maybe you will find your own reasons for preserving the traditions of observing Tisha BeAv. So, thank you again, everyone. Tisha BeAv, we have this Saturday, after Shabbat is over, we are going to present for all of you, not just the Havdalah, but the reading of the book of Echa, the book of Lamentations. Temple Shalom from Winnipeg is going to be doing the Havdalah, and then we are going to have 3 readers for the book of Echa. It's going to be Adas Eviatar from Temple Shalom, and it's going to be Leslie Emery and myself from the Shari Zedek. So it's a collaboration between Temple Shalom, Etz Chaim, at the Shari Zedek, so you can enjoy the reading of the Megillah. And then on Sunday, after the Shachrit service, we have a wonderful rabbis panel in which we are going to talk about what Tisha BeAv means for us. When I say us, I'm talking about each of the rabbis of Winnipeg. So don't miss that. You can have all that information in our website, in our Facebook page, and I hope I will see you there. It's going to be streamed on the same channels I'm using now to teach this class. Thank you again. Subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell so you will be notified. And please, stay safe, enjoy the rest of your day, and hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone. Yes, Adas from Etz Chaim. Adas Eviatar from Etz Chaim. And then Leslie Emery and myself from Shari Zedek. And then Rabbi Finkel from Temple Shalom is going to present the opening remarks, and David Vamos from Temple Shalom is going to be singing the Havdalah. It's going to be a beautiful event. Beautiful event Saturday night. Bye, everyone.